Good morning, boys and girls. I know that we've already had morning meeting, and I'm sure you've already done your reading. Now it's time for a little bit of social studies. We're going to talk about the Pilgrims. I know in both groups, in the blue group and the gold group, we talked about the Pilgrims. I'm just going to review some of the information we already talked about, and then I'm going to try to talk about a few new things with you today. So if you take a look, we did talk about why did the Pilgrims want to leave England? Why did they want to come to America? The Pilgrims traveled to America in search of a new way of life. Many of the Pilgrims were part of a religious group called Separatists. They were called this because they wanted to separate from the Church of England and worship God in their own way. They were not allowed to do this in England, where they were persecuted and sometimes put in jail for their beliefs. So they wanted to go someplace where they could have religious freedom and worship in the way that they wanted to. Other pilgrims were hoping to find adventure or a better new way of life in the new world. They wanted to find a new way to make money, or they were looking for something exciting. So some of the pilgrims came for different reasons. Here is a picture of the voyage. They're starting here in England, and they're coming across the Atlantic Ocean to North America, which is the United States. And we know it was a very long voyage. The Mayflower voyage across the Atlantic Ocean was long and difficult. The extra people on the ship made the ship even worse. They ran out of fresh water and many people became sick. Storms also hit the ship very hard, causing one of the main beams to crack. 2 people died during the voyage. At one point, they considered turning back, but they decided to stick it out. And we know after 2 long months at sea, the Pilgrims finally reached land. Here is another diagram of the ship, and this really shows you down here at the bottom, this level 7, this is the large cargo hold. This is where they would be carrying all the things that they were taking with them in barrels and crates, their food and the things that they needed. And then this level 5, number 5 here, would be the main deck, and that's where most of the people are. Now, different accounts say it was 101, 102, some say 130. It was a little over 100 people all on that ship. This is very, very cramped. So we know they landed after 2 months, and they started their colony, Plymouth Colony. After arriving in America, the Pilgrims searched the coast of New England for a good place to build a settlement. They eventually found a location called Plymouth. It had a calm harbor for their ship, a river for fresh water, and flat lands where they could plant their crops. It was here that they built their village and established their Plymouth colony. So before I go over what I really want to talk about today, which is Pilgrim children, I think it's really cool for you to be able to compare yourself to what your life is now compared to what a Pilgrim child's life would be like. Before we talk about that, though, we're going to look a little bit at their clothing. If you take a look, here is what children would be wearing. In the 1600s, baby boys and girls dressed the same way. They wore gowns, which is a one-piece garment. Around 4 years old, the boys and girls began to wear different clothing. Boys began to wear doublets or long sleeve close fitting jackets with petticoats. And the girls would wear those petticoats with a skirt, and the boys wore the fitting jackets. The doublet looked like that of older boys and men, what they would wear. The girls always wore the gowns. At around age 6 and 7, the boys and girls began to wear clothes that looked like adults. When a boy would start to wear clothing that looked like a grown-up, they had kind of a ceremony that we call it, he was breeched now, because now he wore breeches. Underwear in the 1620s was very different from what we know now. Everyone wore long sleeve, loose fitting linen garments next to their skin. Linen was a type of cloth that came from flax. For boys and men, this garment was also called a shirt. The shirt was knee-high length and open at the bottoms. This made it easy for them to tuck into their breeches. Girls and women wore a garment that was called a smock. It was longer and about calf length and wide at the bottom. This made it easier for them to wear their petticoats, that coat that they wore at the top. Men over their shirt wore that doublet, and you can see a doublet here. Doublets attached to their breeches, which made it kind of like a suit. Women wore stays, what we would call a corset, over their smocks. They had no sleeves. The stays were stiff to support the shape of your body. The stays were stiffened in rows and stitched with reeds. Sometimes they used a flat piece of wood called a busk inside the center of the front. So that kind of shows you what the clothing looked like. Very different than clothing that we would wear today. So now let's talk a little bit more about the children. So the children in the 1600s, children played a very important role within the family. There were 102 passengers on the Mayflower brought to New England in 1620. 32 of those passengers were children. The lives of those children, although surprisingly similar in some ways to the lives of children today, were also very different. People in the 1600s thought differently about children than we do today. Children today, for example, are often allowed to make choices about things that they want to do, like selecting a musical instrument to play, deciding where to go on a family vacation, or maybe choosing a game that they want to play after school, or maybe you get to help choose what's for dinner. Back in the 1600s, however, parents made all the decisions in the children's lives. The Pilgrims believed that children should be taught the skills that they would need to survive as an adult. In Plymouth Colony, this meant that a large part of the child's day was filled with work. Work, work, and more work. Children as young as 5 could run errands, fetch wood and water, and even herd the chickens. As children got older, their work became more and more important to the family. Pilgrim children. Older boys helped their fathers prepare the fields for planting, sowing the seeds, weeding the fields, and in the late summer, harvest the crops. Boys also learned to tend the livestock, hunt, fish, and do any woodworking that the family needed. They were also trained to be the head of the household. That means in charge if they needed to be. As they got older and married, they would need these skills to raise their own families. Older girls worked closely with their mothers. They learned all of the skills necessary to run the household. These skills included gardening, cooking, preserving food, tending to the younger children, sewing and mending clothes, and bedding. So fixing the clothes and fixing the bedding. Pilgrim children spent much of their day working, but sometimes their parents allowed them to play games that improved their bodies or their minds. Paintings from the 1600s show children playing leapfrog, marbles, and ball and cup. Ball and cup would be like a cup that you would toss the ball up in the air and catch it in the cup. There were also board games like Nine Men's Morris and Noughts and Crosses. So that would be like tic-tac-toe. And cloth dolls called poppets. Other children might exchange riddles or jokes with one another. So some of those things sound a little bit the same, right? They played games. We play games. Maybe you played leapfrog in gym class and in phys ed, or marbles. Maybe you've had some marbles at home. And ball and cup. I know we have a couple of those games at home where you toss it up and you catch the ball in the cup. So they did do some things that were similar to us. Children in Plymouth Colony did not go to school. Can you believe it? Because the colony did not have a formal school. Many parents, however, taught their children to read and write at home. These lessons usually occurred in the evenings or in the winter when the farm work was finished, because they worked all day. The Pilgrim adults and the Pilgrim children worked all day. So if they did school, they did some schoolwork at night. These lessons usually occurred in the evenings. The Bible was the most common book in Plymouth Colony, so most children learned to read Bible passages. Children might also have a horn book if their parents owned one. A horn book was a wooden paddle with pages of paper attached to it. The pages were printed with usual letters that were useful letters like the alphabet, a list of diphthongs when two vowels are combined to make one sound, and the Lord's Prayer. The pages were protected by a clear cover made of a thin slice of cow horn. Working, playing, and learning ensured that Plymouth Colony's children became active, industrious members of the community. And that means that they were active, they got out and they used their energy. And industrious means they were workers. They were hardworking and they were learning to be workers. So I hope that you were listening closely, and I hope you learned some things about Pilgrim children. I talked a little bit about what the Pilgrims wore, about what the children wore, and how as they got older, they wore clothing closer to what their parents wore. And then we talked a little bit about what things the Pilgrims did, how they worked hard all day long. And they did not go to school, but they worked on schoolwork at home with their parents in the evenings. There were some similarities, right? We did hear some things that they did that we do. And there were some differences. You are going to have an assignment, and in that assignment, it's basically going to be some yes or no questions that hopefully you'll be able to answer. Like the first one, did Pilgrim children go to school? And you will either click on yes or no. Very simple questions. I hope you enjoyed this. And tomorrow during reading, we'll be talking a little bit more about the actual Thanksgiving. But I hope you like learning about Pilgrim children today. Bye.